revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven revealed what you just said to you. And then Jesus says, you are Peter, on this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And he sets him up to be the rock on which the church would be built. Now, I don't know how much time might have taken place between that conversation in Peter's confession that we heard last Sunday and this totally different situation between Peter and Jesus at the beginning of verses 21 through 28. Jesus begins now. This is an important shift in Matthew's gospel. Jesus is turning his face to Jerusalem. I guess I should look to the east. Jesus is turning towards Jerusalem. His public ministry are all around the Sea of Galilee, over the hills and dales, in churches and synagogues and in people's homes, even traveling further afield, has come to an end. He is sharing here for the first time with his disciples the realities of what he and they will face in Jerusalem. That is, great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes. Interestingly enough, the Pharisees aren't mentioned, but that's for another conversation. To be killed and on the third day be raised. Peter took Jesus aside and said, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. Peter. You got to get over envisioning your Messiah. Just last week, you said Jesus is the Messiah, the living Son of God. But you got to get over this image that Peter perhaps had in his mind in that moment, hearing about suffering at the hands of the chief priests and scribes and being put over to death. Peter can't get the image, or likely can't get the image, of Jesus the Messiah as a powerful monarch come to earth to save God's people. He's not absorbing the reality of Jesus being both fully human and fully divine, and it will unfold during Holy Week just how nitty-gritty and down-to-earth and human Jesus' experiences in Jerusalem leading up to his death are. But Peter can't get over that, so he says, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. And look what Jesus turns around and says. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. How about that? In the span of about 5 verses, Peter goes from being the rock to being a stumbling block. What happened? What in the world did Peter lose sight of? If we take another look at what we did last week after Peter answered Jesus' question, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. Today, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. There's the difference. In 1 minute, Peter is transcending his humanness, his human nature, putting himself behind himself in order to encounter the divine news that he shares in answering Jesus' question. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Peter, in that moment, transcends his human nature to attain a glimpse and an interaction with God in action in our human history, the living Son of God. Today, however, Peter has somehow fallen right back into human habits, and he can't accept the news he's hearing from Jesus. And so he says, no, that can't happen to you. You're Jesus Christ superstar. You'll blow them away in Jerusalem. No, Peter. Get your head and your heart back where they were just a couple of verses ago. Because you've already demonstrated that you can transcend beyond your human nature as a follower of Jesus and get the divine, transcendent reality that Jesus is. That seems to be out the window. However, the following verses, now that we've seen Peter go from rock to stumbling block, Jesus now turns to the rest of the disciples to indeed, if Peter last week declared and helped to define Jesus' messiahship, today, once Jesus has dealt with Peter's slipping back to stumbling block status, Jesus then moves from messiahship to sharing with his disciples what discipleship must be all about if we are to follow Jesus. And this is one of those instances where, yes, these words were captured by the evangelist Matthew for this particular situation at that particular time as Jesus is turning towards Jerusalem. But it also is one of those moments in the New Testament when Jesus isn't speaking just to those dozen disciples who were around him at that moment, but Jesus is speaking to anyone who would seek to be a follower, seek to be a disciple. So it is, the words we heard are absolutely as valid today, August 30th, 2020, as they were when Jesus spoke them, as Matthew recorded them at that time 2,000 years ago. And they might be a little tricky, because this is a fairly complex couple of verses. I mean, we probably know the first portion of it. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Okay, we're probably pretty, that rings a pretty good bell with us, I would imagine. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? Those are really critical verses in Matthew's Gospel, because there is discipleship in its essence. And it's not suggesting that we take a cross, put it on our shoulder, and stomp around the hills and dales following Jesus in what we do out there in the world. It's in those following verses. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Peter's already had this experience. Peter transcended. He put his ego aside. He got beyond his human nature, and he saw the divine in Jesus, the Son of God. That's what Jesus is saying that discipleship is all about. That we need to transcend beyond our human bodies, our human minds, and truly encounter God's presence in our lives and in our world in order to follow Jesus. Not that tricky at the end of the day. Now, it would be awesome if God or Christ or the Holy Spirit would speak to us loud and clear. John, really good job the other day, man. Keep it up, and we'll all make amends come Judgment Day. Mari, thank you for all you do at St. Barnabas and around Greenwich and all over the place, being a loving wife and parent and grandmother. Keep it up, you're doing great. That tends not to be my own experience with the divine. Think about Elijah when he's seeking God out in the wilderness in Kings. We hear the famous story in the Bible, in the Old Testament, about Elijah looking for God. And he's looking for God, and there's a booming, crashing storm. And he doesn't hear God there. There's some other very loud and bold noises and actions that take place around Elijah. But doesn't see God there or hear God there either. Where does Elijah encounter God? He's sitting in a cave in silence, deafening silence. And in that silence is when Elijah hears God speak to him. Now, I couldn't say that I'm sitting in my office in the back country and it's at a quiet moment with the deer wandering by outside or the hawks flying overhead that I hear God's voice. But I certainly feel that I'm more open to God's presence and hearing the divine in quiet moments. So again, God bless you if Jesus is out there cheering you on day in and day out. That's awesome. But take these words to heart in all of our efforts to transcend our humanness as followers of Jesus and to get to a place where we are ever more open to that gift of grace that we know each and every one of us has. Now, a wonderful lay leader this week asked a question about, what's going on at Pacific House? And I thought, well, gosh, I'm really glad to hear that. People are kind of getting back to town. They're checking in church. They're asking about things like Pacific House, which is living into a new normal in some pretty amazing ways. As you know, we've cooked, prepared dinner, and then served it in person to the homeless gents at Pacific House for 5 years or so. At the end of March, with COVID-19 upon us, all of the men at Pacific House at that time, as well as, which was probably 75, 80 men, and another 30 or so residents of Inspirica, the other great homeless organization serving that population effort. Those two organizations partnered in the moment to get these clients into 2 motels in Stamford, where they've been since late March, living in these motel rooms with restaurants and catering companies delivering individual meals to their doors in these 2 motels, lunch and dinner, for 6 months. Now, I've been in touch with one of the senior staff members at Pacific House, and meanwhile, Pacific House itself has been undergoing a tremendous amount of work to make it more friendly and safe when these guys are able to return, which should be sometime in September, so that by the end of the month of September, hopefully dinner preparation groups will be able to prepare dinner. We won't be able to serve dinner. That's going to have to be done by staff members at the Civic House, but at least we'll be able to get back into a habit of helping out by delivering a good meal to these wonderful folks at the Civic House. Now this comes to mind, this question and conversation this week, because of what we've heard in that gospel passage. To be a follower of Jesus, we've got to leave ourselves behind to serve others, to serve the strangers in our lives. And I haven't encountered a single person from this parish or some of the friends that people have brought along who haven't come away from serving dinner at Pacific House without knowing that they've had some sort of transcendent encounter with the divine. It's as simple as that. Now, it's going to be different simply delivering a meal to Pacific House or helping deliver food for neighbor to neighbor, since their pantry won't likely be open for at least a few more months. Good news is their new building will probably be put together this fall. However, it is every bit as important to be disciples and to get together and get organized and get food to the good people at Pacific House as the fall unfolds. Now, after I'd had that conversation and thought some more about this gospel passage, I recall one of my favorite hymns, and I think a pretty great hymn in our hymnal. It's hymn number 541. And I want to ask Michael if he just would play through one verse of that hymn. Hymn tune sound familiar? Come Labor On, hymn 541. You know how in the hymnal there are little sort of topics at the top of each page in the hymnal? Seasonal stuff, Christmas, Easter, Advent, Lent, and then some other kind of broader church topics. In this case, at the top of the page of hymn 541, Come Labor On, it's under the church's mission. And this 5-verse hymn just is boiling over with some incredible lyrics about our call as followers of Jesus in our discipleship mode of going out into the world to serve. I mean, each and every one talks about who dare stand idle on the harvest plain while all around us waves the golden grain. Get out there and harvest. Spread the good news. Be disciples of Christ. Bring in the flock. But let me just also read the 5th and final verse. Come, labor on. No time for rest till glows the western sky. Till the long shadows o'er our pathway lie, and a glad sound comes with the setting sun. Servants, well done. Amen.